And then when we click submit, we get the custom message here, and that function returning that message is what causes the error to show up in this form. And if we get, and if of course if it worked, it just works. We don't get any error message at all. So this record wasn't added because we have a duplicate email address. And so that's how you can plug in these custom little functions through the grid by specifying these things here. And there's a whole host of other things you can do at each column. So like for instance, you might want to preload a select box for that column, and you'd have a JSON method return the select data for that, and then you would have another function that actually builds the select box. And we'll see that as we move into the App Manager and look at some more of the advanced features. These values here for our sort options, if we wanted to do a sort, so you could do a search here, and you see it automatically populates the titles and the headers here with the different options that we specified. So this was the CN, this was the BW, and this was the EQ. And then of course when we search, let's do it begins with letter F. So when we do the search, you see only the ones that match come back for the first name. And the way that's going on is from our paginator is actually looking for those request values. Okay, so in our person hibernate, let's see, in our generic where we have our class, so we're looking for these values, see? So, and this is all part of the paginator factory, picking these up out of the request and setting these up in the paginated factory object, and that's where it's getting them all to run the query and create the criteria. Okay, so back to the list. Sorry, we're moving really fast here, but like I said, once the videos are done, I'll upload the code and you can experiment and take a look at it on your own. So so that's how we're handling custom messages that come back from our action class, that come back to the form, so they show up on the form. Here's how we're setting our model before the record gets submitted to the action, so that we have a model that we can deal with. And in our action class, that's how we're validating, is by the model. So is valid person, see, we have everything in the model here. So that just makes it a lot easier than having all the different fields that we have to pick up. Okay, and then of course we send back an error message if we don't get success from our validator, and then the error message is populated inside that little edit form. Okay, so now the next thing is, of course, when we can actually edit the record also. So if we want to just edit, let's say this record, we can, when we click the record, that causes another function to run. Okay, so we're back to our person list. And the way we're doing that is we're setting up a row select topic, and then up here in our onReady function, we can subscribe to that row select topic, and it sends the event and the data. And then what we do is we look at the grid table by the ID here. These are standard JQuery things. So we're telling JQuery, go get us this thing based on this ID, and inside that thing is a JQuery grid, and get me the row data of the selected event that was currently selected. Now in that event we're getting the ID, and I didn't rename this. This should have been the person ID. And then we're showing that ID in the grid just before it bounces off, and then we're calling this struts action and passing the ID in. So the edit person action is not a JSON method, it's a standard action here. So edit person is basically pulling up the edit form and calling the edit method in our action class. So when we call edit, we're just using one of the internal get methods in our generic DAL to go get the record based on the ID. Okay, and it returns a person, and then when we pull up our form, we have our person first name, person last name, and the person's email address, and that's what we're seeing here. Okay, now we can make changes here again, so let's change that to a duplicate, and when we try to save it, we should get well, it was frank@fred.com, so of course that's going to work. So let's change it to fred@fred.com and see what happens there. Okay, so that was a duplicate email address, and let's change it back to frank@fred.com. Okay, that was saved. And let's change it back to fred@fred.com, and we got a duplicate email address, so we can still do the edits here. We can fix this name. That was probably supposed to be Frankie, so let's save that. Well, we can't save it because we got a duplicate email address, so let's make it frank@fred.com and save that. Now we're okay. So you can click the edit, any row you click here. When we click done, of course, we're running the cancel function here, and this is causing the person data to list to run again. This is here, right here is where we're setting it up in the button, to point to that URL that's right here, and then that's causing this function to run, and then we're doing it again, and that's how we get back to the list after we cancel. So any of these records, when you click it, it's causing that subscribe method to run, which is causing the action to run, which is editing our record. And then inside here, we're also using the tabbed panel. Okay, so now if we had a situation where we were adding address information and phone number information, we could set up separate tabs to gather all that up, but not actually have to show it all here. So you can quick edit through the edit plus button here to add new records, and then once the records are added, you can click the record to get the full blown information here. And I personally think that's a little bit easier for most users. Like if you're doing, well, for the app manager it makes them, because sometimes they need to add 10 or 20 apps at once real fast, and then they can do that and then go back in and configure each app that they want. So okay, so I think that pretty much covers the basics of the grid and using the add records portion of the grid and putting custom messages into the edit form, custom error messages, and then having an on-click function when you click a row actually bring up the edit page with a full-blown edit of the records that you can edit. I think the messages are still a little funky as far as let's see. So that one worked pretty well. So sometimes the messages are a little funky, and I'm still working that out, and that's got something to do with how the session is being set up for these. And I'll get that fixed, or you can fix it when you have the code. You can try and figure it out. But I'm sure it's got the, it definitely has something to do with the session stuff. So, but we're seeing here that, basically how we can use JQuery grid and plug it into struts and use the tag libs and only use a little bit of JavaScript to get the things you need. So I think we're going to finish up with the person stuff, and in the next videos we're going to start moving into the more advanced multiple tabs and grids inside the tabs. So hopefully this helps. Thanks.